Booth, who started out writing for BBC Radio. He went on to become a script editor for BBCTV and a deputy controller for the ITV Network. He's had 2 novels published, part of a sequence of 4. He will be reading from Karu, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, roughly translated as Bear Trap. Published by Tallinn early in March, it's a novel about the Estonian Diaspora and Soviet era in Estonia. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. Thank you. So this is from book 2 of this 4-book sequence I'm proposing. Book 1 was loosely based on my Estonian mother's family and kind of the dreadful time they had in the war. At the end of the war, they were refugees and went into exile into Stockholm. So the book 2 is set in Stockholm 1950, and doing some research, it becomes very clear that kind of the world sort of goes straight from World War II straight into the Cold War without actually about 10 years worth of quite severe wrangling, but no one quite knowing where anything is going. And it's in that sort of misty time that Stockholm was a key city, because as you may imagine, it's one of the borderline countries between the West, which was creating NATO, and the East, the Soviet Union slowly, little by little, establishing itself and flexing its muscles post-war. So we have, and there was all sorts of espionage and subterfuge and all sorts of odd things going on in Stockholm. My grandfather was involved in that era, so that's partly what it is. In book 2, therefore, what I'm going to read is the first time that the reader meets one of the main characters who drives this story, who's the 20-year-old Estonian exile, Marit. So I'll read from that. It's literally the first time that you meet her, that the reader meets her. Marit Kotkas had nothing against this young woman sitting across the desk from her. She looked through the papers again. They seemed all in order. The security people had done their job and cleared her. Marit, once in a while, had to refer people to the security team on the 3rd floor for clearance. If someone looked too fit, too relaxed, too well fed, or their story of how they escaped Estonia was too glib or too consistent, or too inconsistent, then it was Marit's job in the entry and exit section to refer them for vetting. Yet there was still something about the young woman in front of her that made Marit uneasy. What was worse, she didn't really know why. Day after day, week after week, month after month, young Estonians like this had sat there, hope, anxiety, or eager to please in their eyes, wringing their hands, dabbing their eyes with handkerchiefs or shifting in their chairs. Not just young folk either, middle-aged men, the elderly, teenagers, displaced persons from all kinds of backgrounds, with all kinds of stories to tell, often distressing. Sometimes they were still distressed, grieving for their lost homeland or a lost loved one, or both. Every walk of life, a bewildering array of harrowing experiences. And Marit was one of the gatekeepers, working to relocate this flotsam and jetsam washed up on the shores of post-war Europe, dispatching them with fresh paperwork to Canada, America, Australia, anywhere still willing after all these years to take them. Part of the great drive to complete the work of the International Refugee Organization in accord with the will and policies of the United Nations, work which had needed to be extended. Marit, barely 20 years old, with a tale as tragic as many of those who sat in front of her. Marit, the guardian of their souls. Marit, the holder of their lives in her hands, the anxious, the tearful, the aggressive, the cocksure. Marit, judge, jury, and sometimes executioner. Rubber stamp, red ink, denied. Marit took a moment to wonder further why she had suddenly taken against this particular young woman. Perhaps she saw herself mirrored in the other's eyes. Perhaps she had finally buckled under the pressure of the succession of desperate people sitting in front of her, months and months, hundreds of them, eroding her resistance, her objectivity, her determination not to be affected by the catastrophe that was daily being paraded before her. And this unfortunate young woman was simply the trigger. Marit looked up from the young woman's papers. "Why?" she said. "Why what?" the woman replied. "Why do you want to run away? Why don't you want to stay and fight, resist the occupation here in Sweden, or even try to get back into Estonia and fight for freedom on your home soil?" The young woman's eyes filled with fierce tears. "Why don't you?" she said. Marit stared at her a moment and then shrugged. She picked up her rubber stamp and banged it down onto the top sheet upon which were the woman's details and photograph. Approved. And then a few pages further on. Marit came back from the cloakroom. She put on her turquoise raincoat and maroon felt hat. Saving people's lives is boring, she thought. How many have I saved this afternoon alone? About 11 before my coffee break, I suppose, 7 afterwards. She opened her desk drawer to take her handbag out. As she did so, she noticed a torn off sheet from a notepad. It had been left on her blotter. There were 2 words written on it in Russian. Marit dipped the nib of her pen in the inkwell and wrote underneath it, also in Russian. She folded the note, gathered up her handbag, and worked her way out of the room past the other desks. She wished a good evening to those colleagues who had not yet left. Making her way to the 3rd floor by the building's back stairs, she leaned on a door with her shoulder. It opened into a corridor. She stepped onto the musty carpet, once red, now grey with age and trampling. The building that the Allied High Commission was using had been the German embassy before the war, during the war. There were still signs in the faded teal paint on the walls where pictures had once hung. Triumphalist portraits of the people to whom the building had previously belonged. Soviet, Thompson, Ribbentrop, and Hitler. The monster cast his malevolent shadow even from beyond the grave. Although her pass gave her relatively free access, she was not really expected to be there on the 3rd floor. Had anyone seen her, they would have been within their rights to ask her what she was doing on that floor. As she walked, she counted. 4th door on the right. She turned the handle and stepped inside. There were a dozen desks, half of them were occupied. One of the desks towards the middle of the room, however, was empty. She walked up to it, trying to look as natural as possible. There was an ivy green Bakelite telephone. She tucked the folded note she had written under a corner. A woman passed, carrying a bundle of files. Kaya, Marit seemed to remember her name was. The woman smiled at her. What did she mean by that? Nice to see you, how are you? Or, what are you doing here? Marit retraced her steps downstairs. She said goodnight to the security guard at the staff exit. She made her way round to the tram stop. On board and leaning with the tram as it swung round a corner, wailing on its rails, she looked at her reflection in the window. Her mind flickered to the note that had been left on her desk in Russian. 12:30 tomorrow, it had said. Lunch? Newbroken, she'd replied. Her lips surrendered to the hint of a smile.
Great, thank you very much. It's very strange not to be able to hear people's responses immediately, like the claps and everything else. But anyway, we'll hear a bit. So already got a comment from Laurel, echoing with loneliness and rootlessness of both women and of fear and untapped courage. Anyone else want to add anything?
Please unmute yourselves.
got Vesna here. I don't know if you want to say anything. You've written fiction in the...
I think if I could just say, I think what I wanted to do was introduce you to a character which would answer a number of questions from the previous book, which is what I've done and what the publishers and I were talking about, but also then open up a whole new set of questions. And that's what I hope that was trying to do.
Yeah, we've got really intriguing from Jeff. Carolyn again agrees. I'd want to keep reading. Really intriguing from Sunny Singh. She wants to...
Could I just drop in and just say something? Somebody who grew up very much with Cold War parents and in the Cold War, especially with an Eastern European emigre sort of background, can I say it resonated because it had that combination of the personal emotional plus you're like caught up in a river. These are the big things that are happening in the world, in this place. And in some ways, you don't have that much control apart from making a choice. Do I do this or do that? But you can't stand still.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I too agree with what has just been said and with Sunny Singh's comments. I found it intriguing and I want to hear more.
Thank you.
I also want to hear more. I remember you talking about it in the summer, Martin. I think we met at an author's drinks. I'm hooked now.
Good.
Thank you.
Sunny also says on chat, the time and place is evoked so well.
Thank you.
So congratulations. Sounds like absolutely good feedback there.
Thank you.
So well done.
Thank you, everyone.
One more, sorry, just before we stop recording for this one more. James McDermott, Europe was in such a mess after the war. It is redolent of Petru Dumitrea's Incognito. Thank you. Again, you're all testing me with